Andy Dufresne crawled through 500 yards of sewage to come out clean on the other side. That image of a man covered in filth with his arms raised to the rain, finally free, has lived in the cultural consciousness for over 30 years at this point, and has lived in my heart for the last, I'd say, 7 years since I first saw the film. But here's the real question that nobody ever really asks. Should men be aspiring to be Andy Dufresne? And we're going to try and answer the question of, is he genuinely one of cinema's great masculine role models, or is he something more complicated, maybe even dangerous to emulate? With the modern world, it can feel sometimes like the male role models, the good ones, are quite hard to come by. So that's what we're going to try and do here, find some good ones for people to try and emulate different characteristics from. So let's find out if Andy is one of those. Welcome! So we'll begin with the reasons why Andy is a good role model for people, and the first one is he never loses himself. From the moment Andy arrives at Shawshank, he refuses to let the prison define him. He carries himself differently. He's much more quiet and a lot calmer than the other prisoners are, with a dignity that tends to confuse the other inmates and eventually ends up commanding their respect. A tall glass of water, as Red calls him. In one of the worst environments imaginable, he stays truly Andy Dufresne. For men who feel crushed by circumstances that sometimes are beyond their control, whether it be a bad job, a bad relationship, a bad situation, this can be quite a powerful model to inhabit. Your identity isn't handed to you by your environment, it's forged by you, and you can protect it. You can actually try and make your identity stand out in that environment, and the environment might actually improve. Thing number 2 is that Andy does actually play the long game. Andy's tunnel took 19 years. 19! It takes even longer in the book, which is also worth a read, by the way, very good. One of Stephen King's best, in my opinion. He didn't break free after year 1, or year 5, or year 15. He just kept chipping away, quiet, literally, in his case, at what he was trying to do. In an age of instant results and instant gratification, Andy is a walking argument for patience, consistency, and deferring reward. Even the small thing that he did whilst building his tunnel, whether it be the library, the music, the letters, they all compounded into something absolutely enormous. And it's worth keeping that in mind, that whilst you're working on one thing and it's taking a little bit longer, just know you're chipping away at whatever is frustrating you, and try and work on other things as well, so that it now doesn't become kind of negative and toxic. Thing number 3 that is worth taking from Andy is he uses his skills rather than abandoning them. Andy, at his core, is a banker. Inside the Shawshank, he doesn't pretend that that's irrelevant, even though it might appear to be on first glance. He actually leverages his knowledge to build influence with the guards. He uses it to protect himself, and the crucial thing is he uses it to help others. And there's a lesson there about not compartmentalising who you are to fit your environment. Just be yourself and try and make the environment mould around you if you can. Your skills will go where you go, so make use of them. Don't let them just sit on by the wayside. Thing number 4 is that Andy lifts others whilst serving himself. So whether it be the library, whether it be the impact he has on Old Man Brooks, the education programme, and especially Red, Andy consistently improves the world immediately around him, whilst also working towards his own escape. He doesn't withdraw into pure self-interest of focusing on his tunnel, and he doesn't sacrifice himself entirely for others either. He manages to find the balance in a truly horrid situation, and that is quite rare. It was kind of what I was mentioning earlier about working on your own thing, but then not becoming so kind of focused and encapsulated on that one thing that you kind of neglect other aspects. Because that'll just end up with you being burnt out, and burnout's horrible. I had it a couple of times and it's not fun. And thing number 5 about Andy that makes him a good role model is he maintains hope as a discipline, not as a feeling. The famous line, "Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies," gets quoted everywhere, and for very good reasons. However, for me, what is actually quite underrated is that Andy doesn't just feel hopeful. He acts as if hope is real, even when everything argues against it, including Red and the other inmates. It's not naive optimism either, it's a chosen orientation by Andy to feel that way. Men who can maintain that level of hope in dire situations are genuinely very difficult to break, regardless of what happens to them. If you can go into any situation and believe something good is going to come from it, then you are unstoppable. However, Andy, as good as he is, and as cool as he is, okay, he isn't perfect, no one is. There are some reasons against him being a good role model, so we'll begin with the first one, that is he is emotionally closed off to the point of dysfunction. Andy barely speaks, he processes nothing out loud really. Red even wonders if he's made of stone. There's a bit towards the beginning of the film where Andy's getting beaten up by the gang in the prison called the Sisters. It's implied, do terrible things to him. And Andy keeps all that to himself. He doesn't share that with anybody. That Red says this much. He doesn't tell anyone what happened, but they all knew. And now, this restraint can be admirable, and obviously too much complaining probably will start to hinder you and Andy in this situation. But Andy's quietness in this scenario tips into genuine emotional unavailability. I mean, his wife felt invisible enough to have an affair, so his inability to connect authentically contributed directly to the tragedy that ended up landing him in prison in the first place. So if men take the stay calm and say nothing as their entire emotional template, I wouldn't say that's a strength per se, I would say it's more of a slow leak that may eventually cause life around them to crumble. You want to try and find the balance. Pretty much, I guess the message of this is just try and find the balance in life. However, thing number 2 is that he operates entirely alone. As his plan is entirely solo, he doesn't really need anybody else for it. So he needs a bit of rope at the end, but other than that, he doesn't really need anything else. He mentions Iwataneo to Red when they have that great conversation in the prison yard, but doesn't end up bringing him along or give him any other details of his plan, and it comes across as, to paraphrase Red, a crappy dream that Andy has. And they all think Andy's going to, kill himself when he gets the rope, and so he didn't tell anyone what he's planning to do. He escapes entirely alone. And you could argue that that is necessary given the secrecy and the level of security and all of that, so he doesn't want it risking falling out to the wrong ears, such as the guards or the warden. But there is a broader pattern here, which is that Andy solves everything internally. He asks for very little and trusts almost nobody, and this ends up being quite a lonely model for life. Real strength often looks like knowing when to rely on others or when to try and involve others in your plan. Thing number 3 is that his patience is partly passivity. 19 years is absolute commitment, absolutely. But 19 years is also a very long time to not really escalate or to try and find another route and to not really take any greater risks. Now you could read Andy's patience as admirable. He's focused on his plan, he knows what he wants to do, he doesn't want to risk that plan by trying something stupid. But you could also read it as a man who accepted an unjust situation for nearly 2 decades when he could have fought harder, probably escaped a little earlier. There's a version of quiet persistence that actually fear dressed up in philosophical clothing. And the thing number 4 is that his freedom does come at the expense of others. He exposes the warden, which in the story is justice. However, he leaves Red and the other inmates and the other friends he's made along the way. He doesn't really have a plan for those. And Red only ends up making it because of his own parole towards the end of the film, and Andy's note to him is the only reason he ends up at Sawataneo. I mean, there's something slightly self-serving about Andy's escape when you examine it closely. As a true leader, would probably bring people with him, or at least come up with a plan to bring them with him when they eventually get their own freedom. So, that brings us back to the question we asked at the beginning. Is Andy Dufresne a good role model for men, particularly young men? Yes, however you do have to have your eyes wide open. He's not a template to copy wholesale. The emotional closure is a flaw, not a feature. The solitude is a warning, not an aspiration. However, at his core, Andy represents something that most men genuinely need to see more of, who is a person who keeps their identity intact under pressure, who uses patience as a weapon, who refuses to let his circumstances decide who he is, and builds something genuinely meaningful, even in a place designed to destroy that meaning. The lesson here isn't to be Andy. The lesson is know what you're crawling toward. Have your Sawataneo journey. Have your version of the tunnel. Keep going even when nobody can see what you're doing and nobody really believes in you even if they could. And when you finally come out on the other side, you have your own arms up, rain on your face, make sure there's someone on the other end of that letter that is going to be there to celebrate that freedom with. So I guess it can come down to a simple choice really. Get busy living or get busy dying. And that's God